Bam.
Hey guys, I am AI expert Brad Hutchings, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I noticed that you've accepted finally your.
I didn't accept that. I'm joking. I'm joking about that, Pete.
You are an AI expert. I know you get reluctant to say that. And look, anybody who knows what they're doing is reluctant to take the tag of expert because it seems pretentious. But when you know what you're doing, what else are you going to be? Like, what? If you say practitioner, that doesn't really speak to your ability to look into the future, to understand market capabilities in all these different areas where you can apply all of your knowledge, whether it's academic or experiential. You can apply it to a problem and give great counsel. And it might be counsel that someone else disagrees with, who's also an expert, but that's the whole point about expertise is there's competing things as we all try to sort out where that flag needs to go. Like, here's my decision.
Yes, I wish the self-anointed experts put that much thought into why they call themselves experts. That would be great. They don't. They just say, I'm an expert. Here's what we're doing. Yeah.
Right. And I anointed you an expert, so last time.
Yeah, I'm not self-anointed. Episodes. I'm Pete anointed. That's right. That's where that is. Yes. Elon had a great week, huh?
Well, I was going to say one more thing.
Oh, sure.
We are going to get to that. Yeah, let me host the show.
Well, all right. I just want to stay away from me.
Well, so my buddy Rich said, you don't have a PhD, but you have a PhD in the field, so I'm giving you a PhD. And look, I don't stand too hard on that thing, but there is a thing that is involved when you've taken your academic chops and you understand the literature, the corpus, as you would say, in your guys' field, and you have the practical knowledge. You start to understand the limitations of something. So we get set up for a lot of expectations about AI. And in general, like when we kind of see the history of computer type things, it is amazing. Like I remember seeing the first time when Star Wars, the video game, really jumped ahead with polygons and stuff. And I'm like, I'm seeing the future right now. It was on a CD-ROM and everything. And it really was amazing, but it was very limited. Like you could go down a hallway within the game. Now games are spherical, Yeah. So we do see these things. We do love the progress, but there's so many technological things that do flop or fail or become something else. What we thought a PC was going to be back in the PC clone days, that's not what it is now. And so these things, when you understand that and you have this body of knowledge, you can say, here's how this looks. Here's where there are problems. And you're great at doing that.
I will say that the consumer base for technology has become very, very, very good at imagining what the technology should be. Now, that never matches up with what the technology actually is. So that's like the first... That's your first opportunity that's on the table is look at what everybody wants or says they want and know that that's not going to happen because it would have happened already.
Right.
Then go from there and figure out how you can bridge the gap between, hey, what do we have available here? And what do you think you want? What would be good for you? And that's the approach I take.
Elon Musk had a good week, and I want to get into that part of the conversation. We talked about this ahead of time.
Yeah.
But during the so he has this rocket of his and it lands and it gets caught by blowing our minds, right? And so I put into Grok another one of his developments in amazing companies, and I said compare and contrast California's high-speed rail project and SpaceX is that. And it did a pretty good job of doing a compare and contrast. It was well within its capabilities. Now, could I have said, be a little more critical, reference these things, whatever? Yeah, maybe. And I probably quickly could have exceeded its ability. But for simple joy and delight, I thought it did a great job of comparing these things. And it was very friendly to the high-speed rail project.
So you compared high-speed rail to SpaceX.
Mm-hmm.
Why not compare high-speed rail, say, to Hyperloop? Right, Hyperloop has actually laid more track than California high-speed rail has at this point.
Yeah,
and then
why do that in real time?
Why not? Right? Why not compare high-speed rail to the Boring Company? Because the Boring Company actually has operational tunnels, more miles of operational tunnels than the high-speed rail that has been laid. That obviously isn't operational until it connects something.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Those are his failures, by the way, Pete. He said Hyperloop is basically a failure. He said that this week, too. So, his wonderful week, concluding it with, hey, Hyperloop was a failure. Wow. You did more Hyperloop than California High Speed Rail Authority has done track yet.
Yeah, how much track has California's high-speed rail got laid out?
What are we, like 2 miles or something like that?
I don't think there's a single hunk of iron. I think the platforms are there, but it is when we have these grand visions, right? And I'm often talking to people on X about planning and trains, that kind of thing, because the vision of what's there is idyllic, it's utopian. But when you get down to the brass tacks, people in Texas want to drive and they love trucks. And so you have to change that reality. And that takes a significant amount of energy and time and money to do that. And it may not work because Texans love to drive. And Texans will drive from Texas, from Dallas to Austin and back in a day and be like, I just love it. They just love driving. It's part of their culture out there.
Well, if you want to drive to the easternmost part of Texas from Southern California, you are not quite halfway there when you get to El Paso. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing. That's that thing about it's in Tennessee, it's closer from Memphis to East Tennessee than it is, or it's closer to Canada from Memphis than it is to East Tennessee from Memphis. Did I mess that up? I mean, the geography just blows your mind when you see it, but yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, Tennessee is really wide, right?
Yes, very wide.
And you're suddenly in another state, right? Yeah. And when we have these beliefs in something, like I've taken to saying, like, when these YIMBY people, and it's great that there's people pushing the YIMBY thing, but they tend to say yes in your backyard.
Yeah, yes, in our backyard. That's
yeah. Like, hold on, your backyard. Wait. Do what you want.
What me Wasabi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we see things like AI and we're trying to sort out what's possible and what isn't, I get that we see the future, but when you've been around the block a few times, like back when I used to have Popping the Bubble and we would talk to all these tech entrepreneurs, they would always, because they're selling, they would always tell you what this thing's going to do. And I'm like, your robot's going to pick the song that I want to hear. I don't even know what I want to hear, and they're like, oh, well, that's just the data. I'm like, yeah, but I listen to music for a lot of reasons, not just for this kind of enjoyment. Maybe it's an artist I'm going to listen to. And now you're going to think that because I'm listening to this artist and I'm going to interview and I'm spending a lot of time deep diving into the thing, you're going to assume your robot is that I want to hear that, but I don't. It's not what I want to hear. Matter of fact, I'm sick of that. And I may never listen to it again. Right.
My favorite acts have come from personal recommendations. And in fact, it's like where my favorite act now recommends my new favorite acts to me. Right. And it's personal. That's where I'm going to find out about the music I like. Hey, this dude's really, really cool. I found out about this guy, Dodge Roberts. What's his real name? Anyway, you can find him Dodge Roberts KY on Instagram. Right. Chris Tapp told me about him. He said, hey, this is one of my students. He's going to be really, really good. He told me about him like 3 years ago. And I've been watching him and he's actually got like a deal now. He's got a record deal, which is really cool. But that's how I find out. Spotify is never going to figure that out. All the data, data driven, Pete, it's a typo. It's data drivel. That's what the real word is. That's the real phrase. Now that we've established why I'm not a real expert.
So let's go back to Elon's big week. So he does, his team, and by the way, he doesn't do this. He guides incredible people that do these things.
Yeah. And
so there's SpaceX, there's XAI. I watched a video, we talked about this briefly before, where the CEO of NVIDIA is talking about this complex server that they put in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, you guys have to understand, this should take 4 years. Mm-hmm. We did it in 19 days. And look, those 19 days were excruciatingly hard and long, right? So let's say that's really, I don't know, let's say it's 70 days, 70 man-hour days, right? But they did that shit in 19 days. And he was blown away by Elon's company's performance, XAI, in putting together this server platform.
Yeah, we will definitely get into using Elon did this as a shorthand for that. But clearly what's going on there, Elon did not invent the chopsticks that pick the raw. I kind of like doing this. It's just kind of fun, right? He did not invent that, right? What he did is he has his money and he cleared space and he cleared space for brilliant people to do brilliant things. He gives that his leadership style is not telling people what to do. It's giving them space and then holding them accountable for getting it done. And there are even things where they don't succeed because they can't succeed. Look at self-driving cars. They're not going to get a full self-driving car that's just the computer doing it on its own. They're still picking out, kind of the last 5% of assisted, et cetera. But his team that sort of got him here, he dismissed a bunch of them prior to the event. They had got him here. They did a great job of getting him here, but to the next step, he needs new people to step up and do it. And they're not upset. They're not leaving saying Elon's an asshole or whatever. They got to where they could get, and the company needs to do some more things, and Elon needs to clear more space. But that's what he does, is he clears the space. And that's important. Who else is clearing the space? And even back up, Pete, to Hurricane Helene. And he sent his people out to North Carolina, eastern North Carolina, in order to bring Starlinks to the people, because their internet was down and there was no chance for wired crews to get in, to fix the internet. And here he has this Starlink thing. Oh yeah, and he's got next year's feature, which is direct to cell, where if you have a T-Mobile phone, you can go outside. If you can see the sky, you can connect, because he's got those frequencies on some Starlink satellites that are available. And then, his next generation of Starlink, and this is brought to you by the Starship thing, because the Starship's going to be needed to lift these heavy satellites into very low Earth orbit. They're actually going to be capable of 1 gigabits per second. They're going to be capable of using your cell phone, basically being your primary cell phone carrier, as long as your indoor situation isn't terrible. And, that's like a free upgrade. Oh, by the way, guess what you can do if you think 1 gigabit per second is too slow for you? Buy 3. Because the way the internet works, you can just turn that into 3 gigabits just like that.
Slow down right there.
Right.
We'd have no idea. I understand what you're saying, but we have no idea what you're talking about. So why would I need 3 gigabytes? What are you saying by 3? What does all that mean? Break that down.
So you certainly need a certain amount of speed to run your home, your business, whatever else. If you want to do, let's say you want to do a lot of streaming right now. One Starlink terminal might be stretching it for 2 TVs, because it's not the fastest speed in the world. Let's say you want to do video chat. There's a little bit of latency. It's not quite as good as having, cable modem or fiber or whatever else. Sure. But they put these new satellites in low Earth orbit that do 1 gigabit per second. What you can actually do is you could buy 3 terminals. Then with routing software, you now have a 3 gigabit per second connection to the internet. That costs you, instead of $200 a month, what is it, $100 a month? Is that what they're doing? It costs you 3 times that. But let's say you're running a business, and let's say I need to have some access to some servers, and I need 5 people who can sit down and do things. Well, guess what? I could buy 6 or 7 of these things. Yeah. And now I've got scale out capacity. Whereas, what do you do if you have to call the cable company? Are they going to run another cable to your house to get that extra gigabit? That's actually expensive. And this is what blows me away, Pete, as I run out of breath on this run-on sentence, is it is getting cheaper to take that giant rocket, that Starship that he launched, that his company launched. It is getting cheaper to take one of those and put up 20 of these satellites than it is to dig holes in the ground for capacity and for latency. That's amazing to me.
Yeah. And there's one of the things. So I used to do a lot of work with Spire, and they are one of the original. We're going to put small satellites up in low Earth orbit. And nobody thought there was a market for it, to include NOAA. And then NOAA's like, oh, we didn't realize you had this data. We actually do need this. And so NOAA went from being not going to be a client, thanks enough, to how can we not take this data, right? And so as that market matures, there's all kinds of applications that are going to come around, because we're going to realize what it means to have all of these particular satellites. By the way, one of the jobs that you can now train for and get is being a constellation manager for all of your stuff. That was not a job 20 years ago. It wasn't even a hint of a job. And you can be a lawyer. I always say like there's a guy who's a broker for space, for going to space.
Right.
And they're like, hey, they've got 8 cubic feet that can weigh 42 pounds. So you want to buy it? It's going to be $10,000. And they're like, yeah, it's only $10,000 to go to space. Yeah, all right, And so all of these markets are being realized. It used to be that NASA just put ballast in there, but now there's no room for ballast. We need this weight, and there's a lot more things going up, and that creates a different industry altogether as dealing with space junk. But this is what the future looks like. It is robo taxis, it is robo buses, it is all of these things in some form or function. You and I both know that. Heck, 10 years ago, I guess it would be Tesla was driving around at Concord Naval Weapons Station, which is a closed place, right? But they still have all the roads. And so where it's just literally turkeys, foxes, and coyotes out there, they had these robot cars just driving around, learning, getting smarter and smarter and smarter constantly. Right. And now there are people who post all the time on X and other places where my Tesla just drove me from here to here with zero corrections. And that's common.
Yes. And to add one thing into the mix here, one of the things that Elon is very good at, and again, this is not just Elon, but it's his team, but it's him clearing space, is doing what he can do now, taking the easy wins. And like you look at space, and we were mired in a 30-year just kind of space drought with the space shuttle because politicians and generals decided, Air Force generals, and my dad was in the Air Force at the time this was all being discussed, and he was very attentive to it. And I remember him talking about the space shuttle before anybody, was talking about the space shuttle and stuff. But these people wanted a space plane. And the net result was we lost 2 crews, and the dollar per pound to get into space was something like $33,000. The dollar per pound to get into space with the Starship is going to be like $30, which is amazing. With its version of reusability and stuff.
Sure, yeah, right. And maybe they won't get to reload, refire within an hour, but that's the goal right now, right?
Sure.
That's the goal. So we get mad when Elon fails at these things, but he's throwing that dart way out there and saying that's what we're going to do. And then when they fail by 40%, you're like, God damn, look what they actually did.
That's I know amazing. I only get 1 gigabit per second, and I have to pay for 3 of these terminals. Damn,
it's
terrible. Yeah. Meanwhile, the cable company is going to dig up my street in 3 years. I mean, we're still there.
Yeah. Or somehow we never seem to have enough access, right? Because we want more and more data to go through the air. And so like my phone, living in Orange County, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. In Orange County, I cannot have 5G every step I take. Look, I'm not talking about the desert. Yeah. I'm talking about by Disney fucking land.
Right.
Like how in the world is there no coverage?
Right. And it turns out with the satellites, you'll have the equivalent of 4G LTE and more bandwidth just anywhere you are. In the continental United States, anywhere covered by the constellation. One of the interesting things that Elon pointed out, I think his week really started on when he appeared on Tucker's show. And, everybody's got their opinion about Tucker's show. If you like him, you like all of his stuff. If you don't like him, you're going to hate all of his stuff. And if you're kind of like me, where he interviews some interesting people, he's a great interviewer. You don't have to be totally into him to get some value out of his interview with Elon. Elon pointed out, hey, there was this award for rural broadband that we got and then was rescinded from the FCC. It was $40 billion, something like that. And this was actually rescinded in this would have covered lots of those people in North Carolina. Guess how many of these rural broadband customers have been hooked up with all these awards? It's like 0. Meanwhile, Elon's team goes in and is hooking up hundreds a day, despite him having to call the Secretary of Transportation for a permission to land a helicopter of all things. I mean, it's just absolute craziness. And yet he's able, because he's got all this stuff that works, it's on the table. It's an easy win now. He can go and deploy it. And that I think is sort of sets the tone for the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about with him.
When you think about Elon, he does create, because he's so influential and he is such an iconic person already, even if he's trending in a great direction for the future for us, he does stir up a pretty big wake. and that causes people a lot of consternation. And I'll be even a little bit critical here too. When he has the power to go, whatever the FCC says, I kind of just don't care. I'm going to find a way around it. I'm just going to ignore it. The SEC, you guys can get fucked. When he doesn't want to oblige things, it's a little scary that he could just simply say, I'm going to do what I want. You're welcome to try to stop me. And the reality is that that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I don't blame him for that.
Well, I mean, he basically, to launch Starship this month, I mean, he basically did a denial of service against the FAA, which was, okay, which regulation am I not complying with? All right, I'm going to write the report. And again, when we say we're talking about his team being belligerent. But everything they needed, they went and returned. And then eventually they have to say yes, because he complied with all the things. He's probably... SpaceX is probably the only company that's ever been in existence that could do that. Mark Andreessen, famous venture capitalist and the guy who, founder of Netscape way back when, retweeted a picture of the launch of the Starship that appeared to show a frog jumping, in front of the flame. And this is gonna postpone Starship 6 by months and months and months. Yeah, probably will, right? Because there's some frog on the premises there that they'll find some way to, make him remediate or whatever. But he goes and does it. Just amazing.
Yeah. So I watched that episode with Tucker and Elon, and look, there's a lot of other stuff where I'm really interested is how he sees the future moving, and then when we look at, look. The government is either going to be contrary, compliant, or somewhere in between, right? Those are sort of your choices. But nobody knows but the California Coastal Commission outside of California. But we all know it as being a very strict governmental entity designed to protect things that we all value, right? And I think that's a very fair way of saying what they do.
And if you have property that has a line of sight to the ocean, if you up on the toll road, there's sections of the property that or sections of the toll road that the California Coastal Commission gets to weigh in on. Toll road we're talking about, by the way, is the 271. Right. Pete drives down here, and I drive up to see Pete on. Yeah, pretty wild.
Yeah, and so they, I don't want to say they're problematic. I'm just saying they're very good at their job and controlling what needs to be controlled, right?
Right.
They are wanting Elon and the folks at SpaceX to not launch out of Vandenberg, and there's only so many places you can do this because we don't want rockets going up. It's 100 reasons, right? But there's a federal fight, and then there's this sub-state level fight on what they're going to be allowed to do. And here in California, for all the things we do well, one of the things we struggle with is progress. As progressive as we are, we really value rights, especially little small companies, and they can punch above the weight and stop a monster thing like the federal government and say, hey, there are frogs there, and you are going to pay attention, and you are going to have to deal with this in court, and you are going to have to hire consultants, right? And so it's easy to wipe that aside and say we shouldn't do that, right? But they're there for a reason, and they have to be pains in the asses because we want them to protect the coast.
And one of the commissioners, in saying that, hey, they're going to cut back on the amount of flights allowed to SpaceX from Vandenberg, cited Elon's tweets and the political nature of them that was in disagreement with her. And so, he just immediately went to Twitter and said, okay, see you in court. I mean, he is a honey badger. His company is a honey badger about these things. Yes, you government, you do have a role, but you're going to do your role.
Right. Yeah. So getting back into where these things fit, we had an election coming up in about 3 weeks. How do you, I'm not asking you to prognosticate on the outcome, but how do you see this playing out? I mean, it's not hard for Elon to get contrary to any federal government. A lot of these structures don't change when the boss changes, if the boss changes, right? So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is he moving so fast, and is he such a big personality that causes the federal government to do their job, and they put brakes on? They're like, hey, hold on there, Tiger. We're going to slow it down here. Because that's a legitimate response to something that is very uncomfortable for something as slow and ponderous as the federal government. And yet you look at the federal government, it's like, hey, it does what it's supposed to do for most of us.
I think there's a couple things. I think one side, the losing side, is going to be very butthurt by this election, whichever side it is.
Sure.
I know I am very good friends with people who are solidly on one side or another. I don't find myself on a side. I probably vote for the Libertarian candidate. I've been accused of having Republican tendencies, and I'll tell people, "Oh, you don't know about that. You don't know the half of it." But one side or the other is going to be very, very, very butthurt. Let's say that Harris wins. Do you think that they kind of put the screws to Elon a little bit, either through X? Hey, we want to censor this. We want to limit the quote misinformation, whatever else. Yeah, obviously. I mean, that's what their side of the election is about. They will do that. You've got Trump's side, where they're saying, hey, maybe we bring in Elon as the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, just kind of this whole meme kind of thing. We bring him in to make the government more efficient. I don't think it happens, because I think Elon is more of like, this guy just caught a rocket with chopsticks, right? And you're going to have him waste his time on the government. I mean, I'm sorry. Even as much as our debt is, as much as our yearly deficit adds to that debt, this guy is producing more value for our country, for society, than he could ever. Like, as bad as the problem is, if he fixes that problem, it's like, okay, that's like half of what you do in a year, being you with your companies. Like stay in the private sector and do cool private sector things, find those easy wins and take those easy wins. That's what we need you to do, not solve big problems for us.
Yeah, I mean, where's he most valuable? He already does so much. Should we get in his way, or do we let him dig more holes and lay more track and fly more robots and all these other things? Because he is a visionary on top of being a fantastic engineer.
You'd find a way to cooperate with him. Getting back to California, I think one of the, Elon talks a lot about how the Overton window moved on him. His politics are the same as they've always been. I think most of ours are. It's just everything just seemed to move very, very, very left. Probably the best example of that, he and Governor Newsom of California were very good friends. Like, rumored that Elon crashed on people's couches when he was in town at his various companies and whatever else. He would crash on Newsom's couch all the time when he was local for whatever he needed to do. The pandemic came along. In March of 2020, there was a need for this need expressed for ventilators. So Elon, having access to all this production and everything else and all these supplies and everything, he goes and he asks the hospitals in California, hey, what ventilator do you need? The hospitals tell him, we don't need ventilators. Ventilators are they're a near-death thing. They're a last resort. What we really need is more like a CPAP machine. Elon goes and gets them all these CPAP machines. Newsom throws him under the bus for not getting ventilators like the state requested. Right. And I think that if you wanted to know where did California and Elon part ways, that's probably it. Where did Newsom and Elon, who are friends, who probably should have been able to work this out? Like, hey, dude, you guys don't need this. You need this. Like, figure out the politics of it. I'm trying to help. Right. That broke down. The politics broke down, and he moved three of his companies to Texas. And Larry Ellison didn't even want any part of it, moved Oracle to Texas, and then got tired of Texas, and he's moving them to Tennessee now. Governments are not very good at harnessing those like enthusiastic business assets that they have. And I'm not talking about Hitler style Nazism or what's the word I'm looking for, Pete? It's not socialism. It's where the government, the National Socialism. There's a word for it.
Nazis?
No, it's not Nazis. There's a word, fascism. It's not like a fascist business thing where business and the government are the same thing. It's just simply, hey, we're a government. We're in this space. Look, these businesses are in this space. They're trying to do a good thing. How can we help them do a good thing? How can we kind of align ourselves with what they're doing to have a good outcome? And there seems to be no interest in that.
Going back to the Doge office, efficiency is a thing with the government. They do struggle with it, and we tend to default towards making it bigger, but something has to prune that back. Just like business has to prune back sometimes. Elon's pretty good at that. Mm-hmm. He was talking in that interview with Tucker about when the government says these are the regulations, mm-hmm. And my buddy Dave, who runs the Irvine Nature Conservancy, he's like, I've got 30 different agencies, and oftentimes they disagree completely on what is legally allowed. Mm-hmm. And so then you have to slow everything down. And look, this is probably for the better, right? Because you don't want to make a mistake by not being deliberate. But it's challenging. So when you have, like, if you go to space, somehow U.S. Ag is involved in your business. They're attached to it, much like the Coastal Commission. It doesn't make any sense, but then all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, that does make sense. And they do need to understand what you're doing. That's how we run things. And then, so if it's U.S. Ag, what isn't involved in a launch? Which agency? And so when you have agencies saying this or saying whatever different thing that you have to do, is that inefficiency, or is that the system sort of binding itself up to protect itself from outside things that can harm what the government's supposed to do?
There's certainly a lot of system there. I mean, if we just accepted, hey, we did a really, really good job of this, say, in 1990, and rolled things back to 1990, right? We would probably cut out, 70% of operational regulation, and yet we'd still have 1990 was pretty robust, right? So it's kind of saying, there's a lot. It's really, really heavy. Pete, one of the things you've seen with me over the past 2 years is I've lost 50 pounds. Okay. The way you lose 50 pounds is you stop eating. You adjust your diet a little bit, and you don't have to do too many terrible things. I didn't need Ozempic. I didn't need ridiculous workouts or whatever else. I just needed a little bit of discipline. And that seems like, somebody could come in and impose a little bit of discipline. Say, hey, do we have national goals? Are we at least when we regulate, are we regulating in line with meeting, some national goals and aspirations? Right. We're not doing that right now.
Right. Another thing that was brought up in that interview, and again, this is all part of Elon's big week. It was more than a week ago, but he was saying, AI, like when we have to protect ourselves from the bad side of it, one of the keys is that it has to be truthful. And I don't know that you can accurately do that because the sources themselves disagree. Like the government,
on what the truth is,
on what the truth is, and the truth moves and it changes. Like we just had a double holiday. We had Indigenous Person Day and we had Columbus Day, and I put a little thing up on Facebook, and it was interesting to see how the two things performed. Indigenous People Day did a lot better, had a lot more engagement. The engagement wasn't in one direction. It was an argument within that. But what's the truth? I don't know.
I think the truth is it's okay to hate Italians again. I think that's the real truth of this, right? I mean, and then they find out, this is the best part, is they did some genetic analysis on Christopher Columbus's son and his brother, and they find out he might have been a Spanish Jew who, kind of rewrote his story, his early story, in order to, be sort of an immigrant to Spain who was seeking a favor from the king, rather than a disparaged group in Spain, who had dreams of sailing west. He may have pulled one over on them, but actually one of my favorite things about yesterday is two of my favorite comedians, Owen Benjamin and Nick DiPaolo, are fighting today over whether Owen can come on Nick's podcast, with Nick calling Owen Benjamin a Jew hater and Owen just ready to make an Italian, slam against Nick. It's pretty awesome to watch. It's not this group hug, of the big comedians, the big name comedians. It's in the trenches. Everybody hates each other, but they're somehow kind of on the same side. Sort of weird.
Yeah.
Let's
get back towards the AI side of things. So it's got to tell the truth, right? That's Elon's principle, and he's in the market. He's got an AI thing that he's building, and it continues to get better. And like you would said, and I think he had said too, like at some point it knows how to do all these pictures faster, better than most people have the capability. And those that choose to can then take that and get professional and get even better at it, or maybe augment something that's there because they have a skill, whatever that is. I'm less worried about pictures and more worried about words. We get mad when people ban books, but
Yeah.
compelled speech is a thing. Like
Right.
if you say Happy Columbus Day, it's like, oh, shame on you. And it's like, well, it's Columbus Day today. I hope you have a good day. So Happy Columbus Day. And by the way, Happy Indigenous People Day. Both of these things can be greetings.
You can have all this stuff. Exactly. We can all have this.
But if you say the wrong words, we love to jump on that and say, hey, this is an offense. You can't say these words. But don't you dare ever ban a book. So what do we do?
We are a strange bunch. That is for sure.
Yeah. So when you design AI, how do you deal with these things, these realities that compete?
So when people talk about AI today, what they're talking about is large language models. Large language models do a great job with the English language. They do not do a good job with truth or facts or whatever else. If you want probably the best characteristics of a large language model is we can train it on petabytes of data. Petabytes, think of 1,000 gigabytes is a terabyte. You probably have like 1 or 2 or 3 terabytes of storage in your computer. Well, 1,000 of those terabytes is a petabyte. And when you think about petabytes, you're thinking about, like all the data, all the websites on the internet, that sort of thing. We take all that petabytes of data and we compress it kind of like a JPEG picture. You know how a JPEG picture, if you go like super low quality, you can see that it's a picture, but it's not pixel for pixel compatible. It doesn't give you the original picture. It gives you kind of a blocky version of what you started with. Well, that's what we do with all the data on the internet. We compress it down into gigabytes. And when we compress it down into gigabytes, we lose a lot of context, we lose a lot of truth and whatever else. However, what that does when we compress it down like that is, this data center that Elon and his team built, with Jensen Huang's hardware from NVIDIA in 18 days. Well, this data center can actually use thousands of copies of this large language model that's been compressed down to, say, 200 gigabytes. And then they can serve all this, all this AI stuff to millions and millions of people at the same time. But that's because we can compress it down. Being able to compress it down, we lose that truth. We lose the hooks back to what was the source. You want to have the source available. I have a friend on LinkedIn. He's an artist. He's seen some tough times in his career because, quote, AI is going to replace their job. People don't want to pay for art, design, those kinds of things anymore. He thinks that AI has to have this where you can see what the source of what it generated was. And the information isn't there. And it's not there because we don't know how to do that efficiently. Now, so when Elon talks about, yes, it has to be truthful and whatever else, it's a nice thing to talk about. With the technology today, it isn't quite there. And what he's selling today isn't that truth. It's, hey, can you make up a good story for me? Can you make these funny images? He's sort of coming around to, my view of it, which is don't ask for truth, don't ask for this, ask for it to be creative, ask for it to to do things that aren't there. And be delighted by those things. And that's where most of the industry is coalescing around. There's a lot of people who are still, OpenAI is still pushing, hey, we can teach this thing to think. We can call it thinking. This O1 model that they just came up with, when you go and you use it, it'll say thinking for 40 seconds. And then people look at it and say, look, it tells me it's thinking. It must be thinking. No, it's not. Right? just telling you that. But I think where Elon is coming around is people are using Grok for what it is, and they understand what it's doing and like it to be better with these things. But he also understands that's not what people are using it for right now. It's not how he's trying to impress them.
Yeah. So when you're talking to a company and they're like, "Hey, Brad, we need your help. We're going to implement some AI to our process. We're doing medical billing. Let's just say that." And right. I'm just making this up.
I know,
okay?
that's a good one. That's a good one, dude.
So-
hey, we're just $100 here, $200 there. Let's look at the bill. Let's analyze what went on. Oh, we'll just make up a story about it. Well, no, I don't need you to do that. I need you to figure out the facts. And right now, with things that require facts, you require a human being to look down and see what the facts are and connect the real dots, not make stuff up. And that's kind of a lesson we got to learn right now.
There's something as multivariate, which most things are. You now have to tell it to run a multivariate regression analysis to give me an idea of what's there. And now you have to go back and check all that work. If the machine kicks out an answer, right?
Right. And even that's a tool of evaluation. You ultimately have got to look at it and say, hey, does this make sense? Right. If the tool gives you a number that doesn't make sense with reality, you as an analyst have to say, the tool's giving me a number that doesn't mess with reality. I got to dig deeper and figure this out. Right. And AI does not do that right now.
So when whoever the CEO or the president of the company comes to you and says, hey, we write insurance policies, and a lot of the stuff we write is just boilerplate, how do we leverage AI to our advantage? There's a lot of this writing you're just putting in some, and our buddy George, we'll talk about George in a second here, but our buddy George was doing a similar thing. He's like, look, every report is going to have the name of the institution. So block number 1 is, what's the name of the institution? Block number 2, like a Mad Lib. Put in a picture and then populate,
You don't need any artificial intelligence to do that either, Pete. I was doing that professionally 32 years ago for a local regional bill operating company. It was a revolutionary product at the time, writing contracts, with what we call the hypercard stack. But what it did is it took these salespeople who it would take them and the whole process of the company several weeks to come up with a bid that they could give to a customer. And it compressed it down to an hour. Here's a bid, here's a contract, sign it. We'll be putting, we can put T1, ADN, public payphones, whatever else at your university next week. We were doing that 30 years ago without AI. And so a lot of these things that we talk about, and, as we talk about George, I think like the lesson of George, we'll talk about him some more, but the lesson of George is do the work. Just do the damn work. Guy would sit down and he would do the work that nobody wanted to do. And that's a great lesson to apply to AI. Everybody's looking, AI is going to do it for me. I don't have to do the work anymore. No, you probably got to do the work. Sorry, guys. You probably got to do the work.
So our buddy is George Whitney. He passed away recently. He worked in the emergency management field, and he was spectacular at it. He knew where there was money. He knew where there were trip falls. He understood about the entire thing. He was really brilliant at seeing the whole thing and understanding, with his entrepreneur brain, where you might fix something. But one of the things you're saying, and one of the challenges for George is there was never enough George, and you try to build a robot, and it becomes hard to get that robot to do the thing. Meanwhile, the people who write these reports, because no one wants to do it, they'll charge $45,000 for it. I'm not exaggerating. And George is like, I'll do it for $8. And I'll do all of it for $8. All of them. And there's, in emergency management, there's got to be 200 different reports, forms, things you hit down, and someone has to nug out and type it in. And that's why they shop that out. But it costs $45,000 for this one, $27,000 for that one. And so you spend a lot more money. George's belief was I could sell this thing to places so they could be more up to date. Because what happens is they don't do the work. There's no budget for it. They don't do it. What do you mean you need $500,000 to do 5 reports? Like, well, I'm here to tell you, I got a lot to do. And if I do this, I'm not going to get it done. I can't do anything else. Like, well, but you're also the dog catcher. You're also the other, like,
if George told me a lot of these professionals who would come to him and send him the reports to do, they're given all this responsibility in some faraway place that nobody cares about. They're doing their time there, waiting for a union position in a firehouse like in Orange County or whatever else. They're doing their time and their penance and all that until something opens up and they can move there. So you've got these experts who they don't want to be there. And George figured out there's work that has to be done. Well, let's go do the work. Yeah. And successful with that.
Some of these counties, and there's a lot of different emergency managers out there. There's every university, every school district, there's so many of them, but every county, every parish, whatever you divide your state up into, they all have people that do that. And then there's sub people. If the place is big enough, like Denver has its own emergency management. team. It's not just like a person. So like when you're in like I think it's Malheur, how you say it. It's one of the easternmost counties in Oregon, southern easternmost county, and essentially nothing happens there, right, until the second something happens, and that's like when the Bundys and all those people do their insurrection, right? And so, hey, Chris, you're the emergency manager. What do we do about this?
What was Bundy's first name? It's not Al Bundy and Kelly, and it's not them. It's George. What was his first name? I forget.
But
anyway,
I don't want to get distracted by that. I don't want to get distracted by that. What's important is this one person, whether they're crazy or not, it doesn't really matter.
Yes.
You had that emergency manager had to deal with that, and so they're like, "Well, I don't have a budget for that. I'm not provisioned for it." The same thing could be said about Del Rio, Texas, down there in that county. The town on the border is 30,000 people. They're not provisioned for a federal level problem and response. And so I went down there and I talked to the judge. He's like, there's no budget for this. There's no budget to go find and house permanently, semi-permanently, an interpreter who speaks whatever language shows up at the door. So when you think about AI and the ability to amplify and where George was headed, there's a lot of sense in that. But it appears that it's very hard to, one, sell it, and two, to make it work as smoothly as it needs to. Otherwise, George has to sit there and hand pound all these things out.
You have to be willing to take the wins that are available, that are on the table. So, for instance, translation, you can get your phone and it can roughly translate English and Spanish. And it can do a good enough job that if you don't speak English and I don't speak Spanish, we could solve something in short order using that. It's not pretty, but we can talk in short order. Take that win. That's great. Don't expect the AI to come in and figure out a whole plan about how we're going to go and start a business and everything else. That's not going to happen. At some point, we're probably going to have to learn to talk to each other, like directly and not through a phone in order to do that. But you can take those wins. They're cheap. It's like put some electricity through Jensen Huang's GPUs in a data center that XAI built, and you get some help with that. That's great. Take it. Perfect. Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about that data center and things like that in general. But I want to get back to George. First off, I miss my buddy George, and it's a shame. It's a shame that we lost him. And he was in the middle, about to sign a contract with a little government agency to do even more work. So he was going in the right direction. And it's just, I've known him since the 80s. That's a long time. And so, I wanted to make sure we spent some time talking about him. I introduced you to him. Yes. Thinking that you guys could work together. What did the future look like for you and George? Like if you and George had figured it out, which is not an easy thing because he's running lean and is running a small business. You were doing the same thing. What did he think it would look like? If you could have got George to go, this work makes sense. How would you have helped George? And how would AI have blended into that?
Well, I think one of the things he and I did, I never met him in person, but we talked, since March, we talked at least once a week. And one day we're talking on the phone and DMing on LinkedIn at the same time. And he says, Brad, I think AI could be used for creating these emergency preparedness exercises. And he's like, this is kind of how I'd approach it. And so I took what he said, to me in my ears and typed it really quickly into my local LLM and got an amazing result. We simulated a fire, a large fire in downtown Irvine with a whole bunch of calls to emergencies, emergency responders, and then emergency responders arriving and making calls to dispatch and the whole thing. And it spit out this amazing thing. And this was 5 minutes of work. And we're both sitting there and we're like, it's just, we got to take the win. This helped me to form my weird expert opinion, which is take the easy wins. Don't ask it to do things it doesn't do, and he had a product for emergency response. What do you call it? An incident manager. He was trying to roll out. And, we were talking about, hey, can we have something generate events in here so that you could sit down and, basically war game, an emergency response. And you could, the more reps you have, this is the thing, right? How do you create reps for people? Because they need cheap reps. Give them cheap reps and, it makes them, It makes them aware of the process. It also, the reason to do emergency preparedness exercise is not just so not just so you get in the habit of the exercise. It's to find out what's broken before you have the real world situation. Your communications doesn't work. Okay, we need to invest in communications. And then next exercise, it's going to work great. And then next time that it's a real thing, well, we're not going to have to worry about that. But you find those problems. And that again, Pete, that's part of doing the work. You have to do the work. I can't just have the AI do the exercise for me. It can plan it. It can help me there.
Yeah.
It's, the people got to do the work, and the people have to see that this stuff works. But that's the thing we're talking about.
Yeah. And these things that allow you to make these iterative changes, at least get into the field more, right? Because that's one of the things George wanted to get in the field. Then he would gather a bunch of work, and then he'd get to come out of the field and do the work that he built out. And so this kind of always hobbled, but it hobbled his ability to reliably grow and sell. Because even learning how to sell this product, because it's new to people. Yeah. They're like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you can do this in 45 minutes. Like, well, here's how it works. I can show you. And then they'd want to see it. And then George would be like, whoa, I don't want to show you my robot. And so there was that struggle, but also they're like, hey, well, we've made our budgeting decisions for the year. It's like, but it's only $8,000 or whatever it was. Like, yeah, we've made our budgeting decisions for the year. Let's talk next year, but let's talk in June. And so if the timing doesn't work out, if you aren't being blown off, it was because I've tried to work with George on the sales part of it, and it was
tough.
It was very difficult I could set up leads all day long, right? But George is not a salesperson. He's brilliant at emergency management.
Yeah.
And so there was this part that was, it was broken within his world, and it was very difficult to close the loop and fix that. And I don't know that there's an AI aspect that could help with that, right? This is him finding someone he can trust, being able to afford the growth process for that person to learn the business and help them. And that is true. And I'm saying this about George because this is true for any small business. There's just not enough of it. It's not enough of me for my business. It's not enough of you for yours. Right. And so how do we create capacity? How do we make a new Pete, make another Brad, or find someone that we trust to not, the next time someone starts a business and starts it with a friend and they do great until one of them goes nuts and ruins everything, it's not going to be the first or last time. It's a very common thing.
Certainly the upside of doing the work is the work gets done, but it's also got to be balanced against the downside of doing the work, which is you've got to spread the work out. That's got to be you identify the work, it has to be done. You have to spread the work out so that you spread your risk. If all of your risk is on you and you being around, things aren't going to work too well when you're not around, or when you're busy, or when you're sick, or when you want to take a vacation, or you find something else you're a little more interested in for a while. Not everybody is 100% on focus on their task all the time. I think the best performers, and this is probably like my most controversial opinion ever, your best performers are at peak capacity probably 25% of the time. And you as a manager of performance, you have to figure out how to make that work. Lots of people are saying, oh, we'll bring them all back to the office. Then they'll be more, they'll be engaged all the time they're in the office. No, they won't. They're going to be figuring out how to spend 4 hours at the water cooler, or the refrigerator, the coffee maker. That's what they're going to do, or take long lunches. Because they've only got 25% good time. And guess what? It's not going to be every day that they have 25% good time. It's going to be like one day of the week they're in for 100%. The other 4 days they're goofing off. And that's just how it is, because we're not, we as people are not capable of that focus. Yet the work has to be done.
I'm reading a great book. It uses the Dodgers in the 60s as its premise, and they talk about the loss of the innocence that happens during that decade. And one of the characters in the book is Maury Wills, who was a shortstop, and he sort of wasn't supposed to become a prospect, but then he figured it out, like often happens. And so he's just thrilled to be there. He can't believe he made it. And he's an MVP caliber player. He's winning world championships. He's the front end of the offense at a time where his kind of ball, he's the guy. But every year you got to go negotiate with Buzzy Bavasi, the GM. And he is a motherfucker. I'm saying this in the best way. His job is to run this business and get profit out of it. And I don't want to play players too much, because you play one too much. He's got his own dam he's trying to hold up, right?
Right.
And Wills talks about we just won the World Series, and me and Sandy Koufax is a Jewish guy, and he's like, man, it's tough being a Jewish guy in the major leagues. I get hate mail constantly, right? Like there's all these other things that get mixed in. And so Maury's like, I hated dealing with Bavasi because it just made me sick to my stomach. We would all lose weight. We would be stressed out because we had no power to control our destiny. Back then, the team owned the player.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you were too hard about it, they could just tell you to go home and find somebody to replace you. And so it was very difficult, the negotiating process. So anyhow, I say all this because they win the World Series. Everything looks great. And he's like, I go and I don't get a pay cut, but I also don't get the raise that I thought I deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point forward, a little part of me had died. This is Maury talking. And he's like, I didn't get as excited. I wasn't as passionate because he didn't feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
And Buzzy is so busy winning his negotiations and being a hard ass that he doesn't realize that he's broken part of his machine.
Yeah.
And look, there's no balancing point. And we're probably better at this now. But when we see these things in our business, that's like, damn, I was too inflexible here. And if you could see it, you'd be like, well, I got another $5,000. We made plenty of money. Sure, I have another $5,000. If that would have made the difference and could have improved your machine and the health of it, you want to do that. And so I don't know that AI is a thing that can reliably make my 25% of performance I get out of each person. I don't know that stuff is there, or if I'm going to be burning part of that 25% trying to make something that doesn't work well.
Pete,
it's worse than the damn problem.
It's worse than you think. And I think I dropped the term data driven at the beginning of this, to replace data driven. But even back in the day, even back in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of data in baseball. And, fans knew people's batting averages. What are some of the stats that what is it? Wins against replacement came popular, in the 90s or whatever, as we're young adults, and that becomes this new piece of data that everybody's looking at. Now you go back and you compare everything based on that, and you find that people are making decisions as if they knew that. It's not anything new to any old decisions that are made. Very, very data driven, much data drivel. You forget that, hey, this guy in the clubhouse is just, he lights up the clubhouse. And well, how do you put value on that? There's no stat for that. There's no stat for showing up, every day and, just being nice to people and getting people
dependable.
in good mood. Yeah. Right. There's no stat for that. There's no, in software development, lots of software developers have to do stand-up meetings every day. So they tell what their progress is and what they're doing. And, one of the things I dropped on my previous team was, I don't come to the stand-up meeting to find out what any of you are doing. I come to the stand-up meeting to listen to the first 15 seconds of your voice and figure out, are you going to be useful to me today? Is this the 25% day, or is this the 75% day when you're not useful to me? And I'm going to avoid you and give you space. And people would look at me and they'd just say, Brad, it wasn't even Brad. That's unspoken. You're not supposed to say that. That's heresy. But, in reality, it's kind of what you have to do. You got to factor in that these are people, that these, they have feelings, they have ups and downs, they have biorhythms. If you want to do the data driven thing, I mean, biorhythms were popular to measure, in the 80s. If you could, hook up a probe to somebody and find out how their emotional state was. I mean, I'm starting to channel Will Riley right now with my. I hope he's watching.
Anyway. He'll be on Friday. I'll tell him to watch.
Yeah. We didn't get to the cars. We didn't get to the robots. One of the things you and I talked about with the robots that I thought was so interesting, everybody's all up in arms, at least my LinkedIn feed is, it turns out they're remote controlled. This is an Elon's Tesla event. They were remote controlled by Tesla employees in haptic suits. Well, no shit. But here you've got this robot, this humanoid robot, right? It's like they the first unveiling of it is they're standing in a circle all doing the robot, which is like nobody comments on that. That's hilarious. But it's also like the mechanics to do that and to do it fluidly. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I have to.
No, it is amazing.
I have to program this thing to carry my groceries up the stairs. Well, it's going to carry my groceries up the stairs. That's one time I'm not going to slip on the stairs and fall down and hit my head or hurt my back and be out of, basically be out of commission for a month.
Yeah.
You and I have both had that recently.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I don't care
It's
that
amazing.
I don't care that it can't talk to me. I don't care that it can't make up its mind to do that, that it has to be programmed to do those. It can do those things. I was watching,
Right.
we were walking around the neighborhood here the other day, and they're doing roofing work. It's a condo community. And they had a ladder out. There's a guy climbing a ladder. You know, I lost a cousin to a fall from a roof when he stepped off a ladder wrong. Now, imagine robots doing that and taking all that danger and all the people that are going to be saved. And okay, yeah, it can't make a decision about where to put the nail or whatever. You might have to have some dude in a haptic suit, you know, helping it figure out where to nail the boards in. Maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at all the danger that you can save, you know, with that form that can do it. You know, the only problem with the form really is it bends its knees a little too much right now. That's the giveaway. That's the tell. Otherwise, you put this thing in clothes, you would not know, you know, clothes and, you know, maybe a Halloween mask. You wouldn't know it was a robot. You'd think it was a person, like the way it moves. That's so amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine like the best robots don't move like a human. You know, like when you see like the automated welders that have been around for 40 years.
Oh yeah.
They don't look human, but they can outperform a human because they're designed for it, right? So there's some of that as well. And I want to bring this back into the NVIDIA thing with what's his name, Jensen. When we see all of these advancements, you know, I'm big on thermodynamics. We're going to start talking about thermodynamics here. But when we see all these advancements, there's always a cost. There's always an energy cost, especially, right? And so when you have this amazing deployment of these 100,000 or was it 200,000, however many servers it was, that's a lot of copper line that's been spun and put through. I mean, all of that takes an enormous amount of energy to go, and then you have to run it. And so when we look at like the balance of what does it take to run something, are we demanding less energy in our lives or more? And it seems like we continue to pile more and more energy, more and more data into our lives, and data equals energy. And so are we actually figuring out how to use less energy or be more efficient with our energy? Or, I mean, like one of the theories, this was like 10 years ago, was to take data centers and put them at the bottom of the bay in the Bay Area to cool them. And you're like, can you guys not see the impending environmental problem of doing? First off, California Coastal Commission is gonna be like, "Fuck no," but also
rust.
Right, rust. And how about the heat bomb that you're putting off in that area where there isn't a heat bomb all the time? So we have this problem of ever increasing demands, and the solution is always focused on energy. And when I talk with the people on X about trains, I mean, like trains are not the most efficient way to move people and things around. That's why we use cars and trucks. And they lose their minds because in one little slice of the problem, having round wheels on a metal track, yes, the energy required to move those people is less. However, that doesn't satisfy all of the needs of people. Like if you're a mom and you were raped as a girl and you need to have control over your life and you live in a place where you feel unsafe, and now you're going to get on a public conveyance where people are sick and crazy. The next time someone brings a samurai sword on to a bus and kills someone will not be the first time. So these things are all real. So if you feel like, hey, I am not safe in this public transit, then no matter convincing, no matter someone getting a TV show like it's safe on the bus. Yeah, it's safe until the second it's not, and then you're terrified and you're helpless, right? So all of these problems go into that efficiency problem. Are we getting better at efficiency, or are we just putting so much demand on our system that whatever efficiency that's going out is just swamped by the demand for more data, more energy? And these are invisible things. Like it's like the toilet, how the toilet works. You push the button and everything, all your problems go away. We don't think about all of the energy required to make this thing be connected to outer space.
Pete, in simpler times like the 90s, we used to joke that, okay, there's Moore's law, and that meant that hardware was going to actually like this, right? It's with time, hardware is just going to it's going to double and double and double. And the software people like me will make sure that the load on the hardware triples and triples and triples. And that was the attitude then. I think it's still the attitude. Somehow we kind of make it work. We put it all out there. We put out what we can afford, and we kind of make it work. What's different with the AI thing right now is there's so much investment going into this infrastructure on the promise that if we keep investing, we invest at scale, we do this, we're going to have some outcome on the other side. I don't think we're going to have these outcomes on the other side. I think what's more likely, and you can see this, say, in the self-driving thing with Tesla, is, they're Elon's using a pretty simplified model. He gets and Tesla is using a simplified model. He's only got vision on the he's only using vision cameras on the cars.
Mm-hmm.
Other systems are using LiDAR, they're using radar, they're using, also like, I don't know, wetness
Mm-hmm.
detectors, whatever else, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do this. Infrared, all this. He's not doing that. And what he's doing is he's kind of exploiting a pretty simple model. You can get an open source version of this model, hook it up to a Raspberry Pi, hook it up to a little servo that you put in place of your steering wheel, and you can make your car follow white lines on the freeway with high reliability, really, really cheap. There's all sorts of people who've done these projects. You can find them on YouTube. They're really glorious, right? It's the same technology that goes into a Tesla. Thing is, what Tesla's done is they've just trained on all these, more and more images and whatever else for their actual self-driving that they showed. The engineers that ride around in those are now doing an intervention about every 10,000 miles, meaning it's almost there, but they still occasionally have to intervene. That's like a year of driving for a pretty ambitious driver at this point. But that could be life and death. Well, if Teslas with their best self-driving were driving us all around right now, instead of 40,000 deaths per year on American motorways, we'd probably have something like 13 or 14. Like we could solve that problem bigly by deploying this as quickly as we can, even though it's not the perfect technology, even though it's really taking the win that's on the table. That is, I think, the big lesson of Elon. And, getting back to our friend George, like that's what I wanted to help him with is let's take the wins that are on the table. We have to do the work. We always have to do the work, but let's take the easy wins that are on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to the car thing, if it is 40,000, we don't even know if that's a problem, because when you drive trillions of miles a year, like Americans do, trillions.
Yeah.
And you have, it's not that it's insignificant, but when you have 40,000 deaths, how are you reliably going to cut that by 2%? Forget about half, right?
It certainly has gone down with time. Cars get safer.
Right.
There's more.
Right.
There's your blind spot thing. There's laws and regulations. There's whatever else that sort of contribute to it dipping.
We don't have plate glass for glass anymore.
Right.
That was a big one.
Tesla fleet with the reason I get to that 1/3, okay? The Tesla fleet with FSD, which is the thing that you can get in the Teslas right now. You have to keep your hands on the steering wheel. You're supposed to work with it, but you let it, lead, is basically 3 times as safe as the regular fleet. Meaning,
and a lot of times the market's going to handle this, right? So
Yeah.
AAA and Geico are going to be like, if you drive a Tesla and you use FSD and allow us to see what you're doing to some extent, we will cut your rate by X.
Yeah.
And that will cause people to go, wait a second, what?
And I'm not saying that hasn't quite happened yet.
Right. But that is coming because they want to reduce risk. That's what they're incented to do.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of this stuff doesn't have to be done by a local government. You don't need cameras. You can just say, stay out of the bus lane. And the person is not going to be driving, because you know how much input there is now in these complex modern intersections. It sounds ridiculous, but when you look at it, if you're not from San Francisco, for example, and you're trying to get across Market, where the town bends in a totally different direction, and there's a schizophrenic person in the street. I'm not making things up here. This is all stuff
right. No, this is the computer probably knows that a lot better than you ever will.
And there's a gay dude barbecuing naked on Market. I've seen this. All of these things come together. You're a person. You are deeply distracted, whether you want to be or not. And now you have to worry about what time of the day it is, who's on your left, who's on your right. Is there a bicycle? It's utter chaos, and it's not getting less chaotic, right? And so insurance companies are going to want to incentivize that. And if FSD is the answer and that gets sold to other companies or whatever, or they come up with a better solution, whatever it is, isn't this problem going to fix itself?
Well, you sort of hope it will. I mean, all the incentives are there to do it. With the interesting thing is Elon and, of course, Tesla got a lot of blowback for their event. The stock was down 10% after the event. Investors said, are you doing all the wrong things? That there was technical critiques. Everybody's doing it wrong. And
Yeah.
the robots are in haptic suits. Come on. I mean, right? It's like everybody's focused on all the details and not on the big picture. And I think as they start to see the big picture, yeah, these things will be really, really valuable. By the way, Apple just this week announced that it's completely abandoned they abandoned their self-driving car a while ago. And then they published a paper where they just pretty much took down the idea that these large language models can think. And they did not participate in the investment round with OpenAI. That's everybody's kind of like, well, why wouldn't Apple participate in it? They're the most valuable company in the world. They need to be looking to the future, but they didn't want to stake their future on, what OpenAI was doing and these machines thinking. And in fact, they have a paper this week that says, can't do that. Actually, it can't do, this model cannot do that. Don't waste your time with it. It can power Siri, like OpenAI, ChatGPT will still be, what powers the next version of Siri or the current version of Siri, but it doesn't do much more than that. They take the easy win. Again, getting back to that.
Yeah, and we talked about this before too. There's a struggle that technology companies have is to find their next gigantic win, right? Like, why does Apple still exist? Well, they've had a couple of great moments, and that allows them to fuck a lot of other things up that just flat out don't work. Well, and I'm not being critical of Apple, but it's just a fact.
Even the things they don't execute well on, like let's say the Mac, right? They execute well enough. I mean, it's still selling. They're still selling millions of these a quarter. And there was a time when we thought, oh, well, they've abandoned the Mac. They don't care about it. They have no, new ideas for it or whatever else. And yeah, they've done that. And they're still selling iPads and they're still selling, of course, iPhones, but they're taking the easy wins. Some big thing will come along and they'll know it when they see it, but they're not forcing it. It wasn't the Apple car. It's not OpenAI. Something will come along.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they invest a lot of time in that. Something will come along, whether they're buying something or developing it internally.
Right. But sometimes sometimes what they think might be the something that comes along. They realize, hey, this isn't it, and they stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and their whole future isn't invested in that. I'm pretty rough on what TaskRabbit was and how they got there. And it's not nearly the same value as it was before, but they were constantly trying to reinvent the same thing. And they struggled to find more value. And it was tough to make it work. And IKEA bought them out and everything else. By the way, we had that idea way before they did. But that next thing, that iteration of a different product or a horizontal product, they struggle with these things. Why is the industry, look, maybe the Boring Company works, maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe that has to get shuttered and Elon can be like, that doesn't work, we're done with that, we're going to move on to something else, right? But why do technology companies struggle with the next idea as often as they do?
So of course, I'm a big fan of capitalism. I'm a big fan of people being able to invest money, people being able to, kind of work on an idea and then sell it off for somebody to take it to the next step, the dynamism in that and everything. I think one of the real problems with tech right now is we appear to be so heavily influenced by venture capital, which expects to put out 100 investments and have all but 2 of them fail, and those 2 turn into unicorns, billion-dollar companies, and carry the portfolio that way. And historically, that model doesn't really work. Most venture firms peter out. There are just a few that have been successful with it over a long period of time. It's really, really weird, but it does attract a lot of money, and it attracts a lot of attention. And that, of course, attracts a lot of talent. OpenAI trying to do a multi-billion-dollar raise on a $157 billion value. That's nuts. I mean, you have to go to, you should have to go to like real capital markets, public markets for that. But no, they've just decided, hey, we're going to be a 150 times unicorn out the door. That's crazy. But we have that focus. We do not have the focus on, hey, is there a company that can just take what's on the table, take an easy win? Let's just put 500,000 into you and let's make you a $5 million company, a growing concern that can go and do this over and over. Nobody's doing that. even angel investors, don't feel like they're doing it for that. They feel like they're, sort of a pre-round for a venture investor. Let's see if you can, get your team together and, show up for work every day and come up with some idea that somebody's going to fund. I mean, that's what their value proposition is. It's, again, and then, bringing our friend George in again, it is rare to find people who do the work. It is very, very, very rare. Bringing it back to Elon. Elon came into X, bought X, basically cut 90% of the staff, and it didn't miss a beat, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people sitting around not doing the work. And, with this Doge thing, this Department of Government Efficiency, everybody thinks he could kind of do the same thing, come into government, figure out that 10% of the people are doing the work, fire the other 90% and keep going. Well, probably can't do that with government, but it's probably not wrong either.
Yeah.
It's not because government sucks. It's because they're just like the rest of society. There's a lot of people that just aren't doing any work.
Yeah. Well, or only doing a lot less than they really think. Like any individual person in the government, their import to that whole institution doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you cut half of the forest, all of a sudden you lost some important people along the way, right? And so when people are like, "You'll never survive without me," they walk out the door with their cardboard box.
You're gonna be just fine.
Everybody's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that. I wanted to go back, and then I want to wrap it up because we've been talking for a while. But when someone's like, "Man, you know what? Brad's got me thinking about things." When you're talking to that CEO, that CTO, whoever it's going to be, like, here's what Brad does. And I know it's nebulous because every situation is different, right? But how does someone put demomachine.net to work for them? How do they put Brad to work for them? Because when you talk about all these things, you're being very practical. I love the practical advocate as opposed to the devil's advocate, because the devil's advocate doesn't have to win. They stir shit up. But a practical advocate, this is kind of the world I come from. It's like, I hear your strategy, but what's the tactic that's going to drive that strategy? Feed it. Well, we're not going to worry about that. Then I've detected a problem, right? Because you have to have the day-to-day movements, the work, and where is the work? Just deciding that where the work is, right there, and being accurate at that's essential to your success. It's deliberate, it's fraught with errors, but I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the first question I ask somebody is, what do you do? What do you actually do? What do people pay you to do? Okay, we're going to focus on this, and we're going to, AI has come into this, and of course, everybody comes in and they say, what's your AI story? What are you doing with AI? You're obviously inefficient, and you're a terrible business person, and you're tone deaf, and you hate puppies and the whole thing if you're not doing something with AI. So we're gonna see, how can the work be done with AI? All right, everybody's gonna come at you and they're gonna say, all right, well, let's take all your data and let's buy let's buy this data center that we're gonna assemble in 18 days that should take 4 years, and we're gonna put all your data in it, and then we're gonna train LLMs on your data. And I'm gonna say, okay, what's that gonna cost? Well, that's gonna cost you, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, whatever else. And I'm gonna say, listen, you're going to give me a piece of that, and I'm going to give you the reason to say no. And the reason to say no is because you're doing the work, you're doing it profitably, and all the stuff that you invest, it doesn't have an outcome that's going to be positive for you. Something like 90% of AI projects that were started a year ago have been abandoned. And these are core technology products. These are applied technology projects. You've got this economist who just won the Nobel Prize. We were going to talk about him, Daron Acemoglu from MIT, who before winning the Nobel Prize yesterday in economics, last month dropped a report that says this technology doesn't do what you people think it does. Like he's basically MIT economics professor version of me saying, do the work and look at what this does, and then try to connect it to what you're trying to do. And you're going to see there's a big disconnect, and it's not just connected with money or data centers or hardware or expensive, hard to find expertise. There's no connection. So get back, do the work, save yourself some money. And that's the message that I give my clients. And I save them from doing stupid things. That's what I do. Because it's pretty hard right now. Everybody's pulling at you to go do stupid things. Like the easy decision is to do the stupid thing. And I'm going to help you not do the stupid thing and be a hero. That's what I'm going to help you do.
Right. So I shouldn't buy these EFTs?
I think you should hold off. You know what? It's the thing. Like, let's say they do connect the bridge, and it is easy to train these things and to get good results from AI. Well, it's real easy to build a data center. Didn't Elon and XAI just prove that? There's no fear of missing out. If this stuff actually works, it's going to become really cheap to do. Jump on it then. Don't waste your time now when you're bound for, you're destined for failure. Save it for when you're destined for success. That's what I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, I love it. All right, well, listen, what else do you want to say before we wrap this thing up? That was a great bit right there. That's fantastic.
Demomachine.net. I will probably chop that off and post it on LinkedIn. Find Pete and I on LinkedIn. Pete doesn't think LinkedIn is worth anything to him. I think it once he starts interacting with people, it could be worth a lot. But again, we just have different views on it. Find us both. That's it, Pete. It was enjoyable speaking with you as always.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hold on. I'll be right back to you, Brad.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much